very exciting. Okay, so now I think it's time for us to test this out. So let me move this main to the bottom, right about here. And so I'm going to comment this. Let's comment this out as well as that. Of course, for testing. And first of all, we are going to go ahead and say a manager, create a variable manager, and then instantiate our assistant manager as such. Okay, very clean. And what we'll do next is we are going to be using Streamlit, which will allow us to create a web page where we can actually see things happening. So it's very simple. And of course, I'm going to go up here and go to requirements. And I'm going to go ahead and say Streamlit such, and make sure that I run again pip install -r requests requirements a text, so we can pull in this Streamlit package. Okay, so it looks like we've gotten everything. Let's make sure it should be fine. Let's see, Streamlit is there. That's very exciting. Really good. So let's clear this, and now I can go ahead and we can now use Streamlit. Again, if you don't know what Streamlit is, again, Streamlit is just a very simple framework that you can use, a Python framework that you can use to quickly generate web pages with Python. It's really beautiful. Create a Streamlit interface, so we can actually create a user interface. Of course, that's what it does. I'm going to use Streamlit. First of all, I need to go ahead and import Streamlit as st for Streamlit. Okay. So now I can set things up here. I'm going to start by putting the title. So st that title. It's going to be news summarizer. And then I'm going to add here a form, which will allow us to add a field where we can, in this case, add where we can type, where users can type in the topic. So I'm going to say with st.form, and for any form we need to pass a key. Okay, so I'm going to just call it user input form, and then I'm going to pass instructions here. I'm going to st that text area, so we can actually create a text area or text input. I'm going to just use text area because it's cool. And I'm going to say what I want the text to show here is going to be enter topic. Maybe text area is too much. Let's just say that text input. Okay, that's probably better. All right. And we're going to also create a submit button as such. And I'm going to st.form submit button. I'm going to pass a label, which is going to be just a string. I'm going to say run assistant. And now we need to be able to handle the button. Let me see something here. I'm going to run this real quick just to see if something's going to happen. Now, in order for us to run a Streamlit application, we no longer say Python. We say Streamlit run and then the name of the file. Hit enter. And if all is well, what will happen, a new window is going to open. Okay, so you can see I have it open now. It looks really nice. And news summarizer, we can enter something and we have the button here. So just like that, we're able to create a user interface that looks wonderful. Next, let's go ahead and handle this submit button, because we want, once this submit button is clicked, something needs to happen. So I'm going to say if submit button. In this case, that's how you handle submits. We're going to go ahead and create an assistant and thread if they don't exist. So I'm going to call the manager because we instantiated here. And I'm going to say dot create assistant. Look how beautiful this is, because now we can just go ahead and call those methods, right? The function in this case, from our manager object class that we created. And for that, we need to pass a few things. I'm going to pass the name. The name is going to be news summarizer as such. And then I'm going to pass instructions, and I already have those instructions. I'm just going to copy and add them here, so that way we don't have to do all of this. Okay, so essentially it says here you are a personal article summarizer assistant who knows how to take a list of articles, title and descriptions, and then write a short summary of all the news articles. Now, the most important thing here is that we need to pass the tools list. right? So the list is going to go in as an object or a dictionary in this case, and we need to pass a few things here. So now I have all of that already, and you'll have access to all of that. This is the dictionary that you need to pass in for our function calling to work. So inside of the tools, you say this. So we have the type, it's going to be function. The function, we're going to get, the name is get news. Remember, it has to be the same name of the function we created earlier, get news. Very important. And then the description, we can add a description here for that function. We have the parameters, and then we have the parameters, and then we have the parameters field, which is an object or dictionary. It's going to be an object, the property, and importantly, notice here the property is the topic. This is the argument, right? So topic is going to be type of string, and we need to pass the description of that property, which is topic. Remember, we're adding topic because that was the argument we're passing. It has to be exactly the same name. This is very important. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Okay? And so we pass the description, the topic for the news, for example, Bitcoin and so forth. Now, the important part here is the required, because this is going to be the argument parameter. As you see, this is part of parameters, and that is required, which is going to be the topic. Notice these are the same names as the arguments or parameters we passed in the function. Okay? So when we click the button, then we're going to create an assistant, and then also we are going to go ahead and create right below that. We're going to go ahead and create the actual thread, because that is needed, right? To create a thread, we're going to use manager again, and then invoke the function or run the function or call the function, create thread. We don't have to pass anything. And next, we're going to go ahead and add the message and run the assistant as such. How do you do that? Well, we're going to use manager again. This is the beauty of having that class, right? And call the add message to thread function. And then here we need to pass the role. The role is going to be user. Content, it's going to be, I'm going to pass in as an F string. So I'm going to copy what I have here already, so it's easier. So for content, it says summarize the news on this topic and pass in the instructions. Now, where is this instructions coming from? Well, this is the instructions we're getting from the text input. Very good. Once we've added that message, this is going to be a message to the thread, right? What we need to do then is just say manager that run assistant, right? That method, and pass in the instructions, which is going to be summarize the news. Okay, you can be more elaborate, but that's okay. And once we have that, then we are going to wait for completion and process then the messages. Okay, so I'm going to call manager again, say wait for completed. It's called wait for completed. It should be wait for completion. So we have that. So change that. So that wait for completion. And then we're going to have a summary here, which is going to be, which then I'm going to call the manager dot get summary, because at this point we should have a summary. And once we have this summary, we can then say st for streamlit and write that summary, okay, into our page. And then st, again, I'm going to add a text here, which is going to be the run steps. And then I'm going to st that code. So this is just going to show the run steps at the bottom. And then I'm going to pass, it's called manager, that run steps function, which we created, right? It's going to just go ahead and show all these steps. And I want this line numbers to be true as such. That's about it. So we are now calling everything. First of all, we created the assistant. Make sure that we pass the tools, which is going to be a function calling tool essentially. And then we create the thread that's needed. And then once the thread is created, we are going to create, in this case, call the add message to thread, add the user and the summarize news on this topic, which is going to be instructions, right? And we're going to run the assistant, pass the instructions. We're going to wait for completion, right? A few seconds. And then we get the summary, manager gets summary, and then we write that summary into our page. And then of course we also get the steps so we can show at the bottom. That's it. So now if I save this, go ahead and run again. I think I could go back and always rerun. Okay, let's go ahead and say OpenAI and run. All right, so after a few moments, you can see that we have here are some recent news articles about OpenAI, and goes and gets the title, How to Stop Another OpenAI Meltdown. And it's got all the main points, the author, source, description. So what happens now in the back end, the assistant was able to go and create all of this, the description as a little summary. Okay, the same thing with Wired. So everything related to the description here is indeed showing. Now it's saying none here. Maybe perhaps in the code I put something wrong, but that's okay. We can look at that a little bit later. Okay, so as you can see, this is indeed working. And if we go back to our command line here, or terminal, I should say, there's a lot that has shown up here. And let's see. So we see here in one of the run status, we have the assistant ID. So I'm going to copy that assistant ID and go back to our code. And for our assistant ID here, I'm going to actually paste that in. And let's go ahead and find the thread ID. And there we go, the thread ID. Let's just copy this. And I'm going to put there. So this is what we're going to be using. Very well. So that means then I'm going to go ahead and stop this altogether, because now we're going to change gears to make sure that we don't recreate this same, we don't create yet another assistant if we were to run this, in this case, adding something else. Okay. So I stop that, and this is stopped. Now, if you go to OpenAI, let's go to our assistants. We should see that indeed we have this new summarizer assistance with that ID, which is the same ID that we just added, hard-coded, to make sure that everything works as intended. Okay, so now that we have actually added this thread ID as well as assistant ID, we have this code so that it will check if there's already an assistant ID. Okay, if there is an assistant ID, we're just going to go ahead and retrieve that assistant, right? Say assistant, beta assistant, and retrieve. Same thing with the thread. Okay, so this is why we had this code before. So now if I save this, let's go ahead and rerun again. I'm going to refresh this. So this time here, I'm going to run again. Let's have a different topic. Let's say US inflation. Let's go ahead and run. So we'll take a few moments. And there you have it. Here are some recent news articles about US inflation. And we have the title, the author, and everything. And we do have that description, which is really nice. And we also have to read more. The homelessness in the US hit record high, and all this information. Very good. So we're still getting none for steps here. We can look at the code just to make sure, because for steps, I saw earlier that we should be getting something, but I think let's see. Okay, I have run steps. Let's go to our code. Okay, run steps. I'm just in run steps, self list. Right, I'm printing the run steps, and I should return, that's why, run steps like this. And of course, I can move this there, so this actually works. I can actually save this. And I'm going to probe into data to actually get the right information. All right, there we go. So now if I go back here, and I'm going to say always rerun, or just rerun one time, that's okay. And I'm going to find something else. Let's say Apple. Okay, after a little bit, you can see that indeed this is running. Here are some recent news articles about Apple and Apple Pay, Apple Card, Apple Visa, TV, and all this great stuff. So you can see, oh, there we go. And of course, we have all the run steps, which is exactly what we want to see. And this is just for us to debug. Of course, in a final project or product, you probably shouldn't have this there, but I just want to show you. So we have this is working. If we go to our assistants, we'll see that we don't have duplicates of assistant. We just have one summarizer, because now we're able to get the assistant ID. And of course, we printed out the thread ID. So we're using those for our assistants API that we're creating here to summarize our news. Very cool. So I hope this is making sense. I hope you are seeing the power of using function calling with Assistance API. And it's part of adding more tools to the toolkit so that the assistant is able to run things and get information, extra information from somewhere else. As you can see, we're tapping into a totally different thing per se, totally different system, API in this case, to get information and pass that back through the large language model. In this case, the model that we're using, large language model that we're using here, GPT-3. We instructed it to create a summary, get that information and summarize everything, and then pass it back to the thread as the response. And that's what we're getting here. And you can see a lot of different use cases that can come up from this, right? You can create, for instance, a newsletter application that what it would do is, depending on the topic that you pass in here, it will just generate a newsletter with the main points about that topic. So the things you can do are literally endless. There's so many things you can do with this, and I hope you are seeing the power that we have here. Okay, so all of this is just using the Assistance API. Okay, so far we've done a lot of things, and the last thing we did was to create this summarizer, new summarizer, which allows us to look into passing function calls to our assistant. That way we can extend even more the toolings that we can pass to our assistant to do something else. Right. So in this case, the assistant now has this function call. We just looked at one function call, but you can have many function calls. And this is very important because that, as I said, will extend the capability of our model. Because not only can we rely only on what the large language model knows, now we can include other tools so that the large language model, the model in this case, will have more context, more knowledge base. So that's what's all about. So it gives us that flexibility. And what I want you to do is to think about use cases that you can implement at your work or maybe in your projects. What else can you do? The example that I showed you here was tapping into, or calling in this case, an API, a news API, but you could tap into a database, for instance, or do all sort of things. So the idea is that now you have that capability, and you see how function calling is really awesome when it comes to creating really powerful assistants. So next, what we'll do is we're going to look at knowledge base retrieval tool, because now we're going to look at how to even give more context, more knowledge, specific knowledge that we would want to our model so that our assistant is able to have the knowledge to answer certain questions and get us the results that we want. Okay. What we're going to be building is what I call a study buddy. Essentially will allow us to upload certain PDF files, and then we can type questions in a chat bot and get answers pertaining to those documents or that document that we have uploaded. Okay. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the background of how things work, how this retrieval thing really works, right? In the back end. So how does it work, this knowledge retrieval? The way it works is very simple. If you look at this, we have documents. A document could be whatever we upload. In this case, let's think of it as just a PDF file. Okay. So what happens now is that we pass that, or we upload that to OpenAI large language model, which has this massive knowledge base. But when we pass these documents in, that means those documents or files are now part of these large language model knowledge base. That's the whole idea. So that way, when we query or we ask questions to the model, which now understands more than what it knows because we've passed more knowledge per se, then we can get the answers. So this is what we have in a nutshell. But there's a lot of things that are happening internally here. One of the things is, if we look inside, right? So what happens now is that we're taking a document and we put it through a document splitting process. Okay, so the documents are split or cut up into smaller chunks, and then those are actually saved in what we call a vector store. Now, this is what generally happens when we talk about pushing information, in this case, documents and so forth, to the large language model, so it has more context, has more knowledge. Okay, so the question here is, okay, what is this vector store and why is that even important? The thing to keep in mind here is that in a vector store, the representation of the document is not the same as we started with. So this is not even documents chunk. This is not even a document that you and I can read anymore. Now we have this different representation that we call embeddings. So what happens is that a vector store holds embeddings. So embeddings is a vector, just a mathematical representation of the text of those documents. And that is indeed what is put inside of the vector store. A vector store is just a database that holds all of this mathematical representation of our document. Now, the reason why embeddings are so important is because embeddings are, first of all, our mathematical representation, which means it's really easy for algorithms to be able, in this case, to search for whatever it's looking for the text, for the meaning, and so forth. So there's a lot more to that, but that is the idea. Because now we can look for pieces of text. In this case, we call text, but they're not necessarily text. They're mathematical representation, but let's call them text. So now it's easy to look for the pieces of text and trying to find similarities between those pieces of text, which are now embeddings. The idea, so visually again, this is what happens. So you have all the documents. So I'm putting different kind of documents, but right now we're talking about just PDF files, but it could be anything really in general. Okay. And that has to be transformed into embeddings, as I just said, which are these mathematical representation of those pieces of data, the text or the document, which we call vector representation. And that is what is pushed into this massive algorithm that will then know how to do the similarity search to find the right result per se. Okay. So the idea here is as follows. The questions also have to be transformed into embeddings so that they are able to be understood and be searched for. Because if the information now is in the vector representation format, makes sense that the answer, or rather the question, the query, has to be the same format. That way, the algorithm is able to do the searching in the vector store and so forth and get the right information. And of course, that gives us the result. So essentially, this is how it looks like again. Okay. So we have the vector store loading. So this is not necessarily just what happens with OpenAI. In this case, we're talking about it, but I'm talking about in general, this is what would happen. So in this case here, we have the document loading. So what happens then, we split everything, and then all the splittings, those are the vector representation of our documents here. They put into a storage, a vector store. Okay. Now the retrieval, in this case, everything is going to be indexed, right? So now we have a question or a query. We go through the vector store, the retriever. So we retrieve the relevant splits because the information now is in this different format. And now the search happens to find what goes with what makes more sense, right? To find the most similar pieces of data so that we understand what's going on. And then once that is retrieved, the most similar pieces of data, that's what it's then put into a prompt, right? So we have that prompt, the query, and we have that what we've received from the retrieval. The documents were split and everything. And with the prompt and with the help of the large language model, in this case just a model, that's when we get the answer. So this, my friends, this is how it works in the back end. Now, if we go ahead and look back at the OpenAI, you notice that in this case, OpenAI simplifies everything for us when it comes to this whole process, because now we have some sort of like a black box where all of the things that I've just told you now is happening. All we have to be concerned about is to get the document, push them into this black box per se, and then we can just start conversing with our large language model, in this case, our model, in this case, in the form of our Assistente API. So this is what we're going to be doing next. Next, we're going to learn how to do knowledge retrieval by pushing or by uploading files, in this case, documents, to our Assistente API, and then be able to ask questions about those documents. So I went ahead and created a new project called Study Buddy, and I've set up the environment variables and everything. And I also have requirements .txt. We have all of these. Let's see. We don't need request anymore, I don't think. That's okay. So let's go ahead and run pipe install real quick here. Our request, so we can get all those dependencies. All right. So we got all those dependencies. That's very good. And what we'll do next, let's get rid of that. In our app here, everything should be looking good. Nothing new. I've got a few imports as well. Some of them, we're not going to use them. That's okay. We can get rid of them when we need to. And one thing I noticed I've changed here is that now for a model, we have GPT-4 1106 preview. Now remember, these could change depending on when you're watching this. You can go to the documentations and see that. Okay, but this should work. So the first step we need to do is how do we upload files to the Assistente API in the backend? Okay, so let's put number 1 here. Upload a file to OpenAI embeddings. Essentially, that's what we're doing. Embeddings, yes. Okay, so to do so, first of all, we need to get those files. And I already have that prepared for us. So I'm going to go ahead and get it. The one file, at least, which is going to be, in this case, this is the understanding cryptocurrency. It's very short, nothing too large. That's okay. And we're going to use that and upload that to the embeddings, the OpenAI embeddings. Okay. So I'm going to say file path. I'm going to create a file path here. And because it's literally here, so what we're going to do, it's just going to go ahead and say ./, and of course, make sure that, you know, depending on what operating system you're on. So this is how we do on Mac. So I know it's cryptocurrency. So I'm going to cryptocurrency.pdf. That's the name. So make sure the name is exactly the same. And then I'm going to create an actual file object, and I'm going to say client, right? Beta. And I'm going to files. Let's see. No, it has to go client files. It's not beta, which is good. So, and then let's say I'm going to create, and I'm going to pass the file. I'm just going to say open, and then pass the file path as such. And I'm going to say RB. And we need to also pass the purpose why we are uploading this. In this case, I'm just going to say that purpose is going to be equal to assistance like that. Okay, there we go. So now we have, let me put this perhaps in a new line. No, doesn't work. So now we've created the actual file object, which is going to be pushed into the OpenAI embedding, in this case, the OpenAI Assistente API. Okay, and then step number 2, very simple, is we're going to create an assistant. Oh, we've done this many times, so you should know how to do this now. So I'm going to just go ahead and do it anyway. So assistant, I'm going to use our client. I'm going to have to do beta for now. Assistants.create, and we have to pass a few things. First of all, it's going to be name. I'm going to call this Study Buddy. And then instructions. And I have the instructions here, so I'm not going to bore you. So I'm going to just get all of that and show you here. Okay, so I do have the instructions here. You are a helpful study assistant who knows a lot about understanding research papers. Your role is to summarize papers and do all these things. So you're going to have access to all of this, so there's no need for me to go through. But it's important to remember that whenever you're creating these instructions, these are the prompts. So you need to be very thoughtful and very specific of what you want these assistants to be able to do. Next, the important thing here is tools. The tools we're going to have to pass here are essentially simple. I'm going to pass just one tool, and the type of this tool, I'm going to say it's going to be retrieval because we want to be able to upload a file or files. Okay, I'm going to say model. In this case, I'm going to say model, pass the model that we created at the top. And then we need to pass also file IDs. Notice it says IDs, not ID. That means we can pass more than one file. And that's why we have a list here. So I'm just going to go ahead and say the file object dot ID like this. Okay, this file object, again, remember, that's what we created here. And for reasons that you know by now, I'm just going to go ahead and get the assist ID so we can use it later. So I'm going to say assist ID. I'm going to use the assistant and get the ID. I'm going to go ahead and print that one, assist ID. And then I'm going to just paste some of the code here. This is for later once we've run once. So we have the thread ID and assist ID, then we're going to add them here. So these are old ones, so they're not going to work. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and make them empty as such. So, and I can also go ahead and go like this for now. And next I'm going to go ahead and create, in step 3, we create a thread. Again, nothing new here, same thing. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to create a message here. And for now, I'm just going to say, what is mining? Something like that. That's okay. So let me go ahead and create a thread here. So thread, just client, beta, threads, and we'll just go ahead and create a thread. No need to pass anything. And let's go ahead and get the thread ID right away. That ID. Let's go ahead and print thread ID like that. Say run the assistant. So I'm going to say run client threads runs create. Okay, and we need to pass the thread ID, so it's going to be thread ID as such, and assist ID gonna be assist ID. And instructions, I can just put something here that says please address the user as Bond, as Bruce. I'm also going to go ahead and pull in this wait for run completion. We've seen this before, so no need for me to go through. The idea is that it's going to go ahead and wait for